Chapter 22, the Procession. As you can imagine, we only have a few chapters left, I think 2 or 3. We have got to be heading into a climax here, right? So this continues where we're just going pretty much chronologically, one day to the next. This is the procession, which is the parade and the gathering that occurs for the election day, which will obviously include Dimmesdale's sermon. So that's the first thing we see in the first paragraph. So Hester Prynne is getting ready for this special day. She goes with Pearl to the center of town, and the procession itself is organized in a very particular order, pretty much based on rank within society. So the first group of people to march are the military. And there's also a small little band that plays, and this just reminds us of the time. You know, this is a group of people in the Massachusetts Bay Colony who are working hard to create a society. So they have some parts of it and not others. So there's a variety of instruments, perhaps imperfectly adapted to one another, that played with no great skill. So these are not great musicians. It's like, everybody bring the instruments you have and let's figure out how to play something. That's sort of what this is like. Pearl is excited by the music, but then she sort of gazes silently and seems to be borne upward like a floating seabird on the long heaves and swells of the sound. So she's sort of transported by the music. She, again, takes on a symbolic sort of, she's greater than just her human self sort of symbol as she sorts of floats like a seabird. Remember, her mother and Dimmesdale and Pearl are supposed to be venturing out to sea later that day in the evening with the Spaniards. So maybe that's an allusion or a reference to that. It talks about the kind of military equipment that they have, which again isn't much. It's kind of similar to the instruments. They have like some general armor, the occasional sword or whatever. The people that are marching as the military are not necessarily their army. It's just basically people who either feel like sort of a call to be a military person. That's the stirrings of a martial impulse, or maybe in Europe they had served in the military back in England and they have some sort of identity as a soldier from their previous life before they came to America. So that's who follows the band. And then after the band comes the government. And so we call these, like, as a group, the Magistrates. These are people like Governor Bellingham, other people who basically do the work of the bureaucracy for that colony. And what's interesting is how they describe them. They are not necessarily talented people. They are not necessarily smart people. They are people who really, so we have the word reverence here twice. This shows that these are people who have great respect for the law. They have great respect for what they're doing as a colony. And so they're very proud and they're very serious. It says that they have a ponderous sobriety. They're more serious than they are actively intellectual here. So they are respected because they care deeply about ruling this new colony and creating a society that reflects their values. But it's not that they're necessarily smart. So I wrote here that the order of the people in the parade are the military, following the band, the military, the magistrates, and finally the clergy. And clergy is our general term for all people involved in the church. But I just want to mention here that it does say that, if these men who are marching as the magistrates, the government representatives of the colony, if they had been in England, they would have been respected, is what they're saying here. The mother country, meaning England, would not have been ashamed to see these foremost men of an actual democracy adopted into the House of Peers. So the House of Peers is a reference to Britain's House of Parliament, which is similar to the United States Congress. It's basically representatives from different areas of the country that, speak on behalf of the people and help to make the laws. or the privy council of the sovereign. This would be like the equivalent of the cabinet to our president, people who advise the leader. And of course, in England, the leader is a king. So what they're saying here is that these men that are marching for the Massachusetts Bay Colony parade are, decent enough at what they do that they could be considered, quality people. Even at home in England, they could have been maybe a member of parliament or in the king's cabinet. So these are they're doing a good job, basically, for whatever it is their goals are. Because, of course, that's part of what Hawthorne is criticizing here, is that the Puritan community is way too restrictive and demonizes a lot of sort of basic human behavior. So I wouldn't say that like he's putting in a plug for how great their policies are. It's more that they are dignified men and they're doing a good job. It's no easy task to start a whole new society in a foreign land. Following them then is the clergy. And the clergy do have intellectual ability. This obviously includes Dimmesdale, along with Reverend Wilson and all the other people that are involved in the church. So his was the profession at that era in which intellectual ability displayed itself far more than in the political life. For leaving a higher motive out of the question, it offered inducements powerful enough in the almost worshiping respect of the community to win the most aspiring ambition into its service. So, like, you have to be, since the church was the center of the community, you have to be respected for your intellect, is what they're saying here. It does say, this is an actual reference to a real person and such an interesting name. It does say that even political power, as in the case of Increase Mather, was within the grasp of a successful priest. So being a minister, being a successful leader of your church in New England did qualify you to be a political leader. So this is an example of, the blending of church and state. Increase Mather is an actual person from the 1600s to early 1700s who was a minister who ended up kind of crossing over into more political life. He ended up becoming the president of Harvard. He also had a son named Cotton Mather, who was also involved in the Salem witch trials. So these are the most unusual names. It makes me wonder, like, what made them name, Increase and Cotton. But I mean, they have, it's their symbolism there, I suppose. You want to increase your influence. You want to increase your wealth. Maybe cotton, obviously that was one of our most important crops as a new country. So I don't know. It's just interesting. When I read this, I was like, is that actually a person? It is actually a person. So this is, again, anytime Hawthorne puts in a real person, he's making a comment about the society at that time. So it was the observation of those who beheld him now that never since Mr. Dimmesdale first set his foot on the New England shore had he exhibited such energy. He is like a new man. Remember, he tore up his old election sermon and wrote a whole new one straight through the night. He is very invigorated by this idea of getting away with Hester and Pearl and, living a life of freedom, no longer doing penance for his sin. His strength seemed not of the body, though. Like it's a very sort of spiritual strength that he has. And it sort of describes, I just wrote here, he's kind of in the zone, so abstracted was his look, it might be questioned whether Mr. Dimmesdale even heard the music. There was his body moving onward and with an unaccustomed force, but where was his mind? Far and deep in its own region. So he is like ready for this sermon, which creates a little suspense because we don't know what's in it, right? So Hester is looking at him, obviously, because she's like, oh my God, there's my husband, potentially. She feels a dreary influence come over her. And she feels like, he's kind of beyond her reach. She can't recognize him in this zone that he's put himself in. And she feels sad about it. She's like, is this the same man who I saw in the forest, who held my hand, who, hugged me? I took down my hair. they had this moment of complete open communication, and now he seems so different. He seems so unattainable. Her spirit sank with the idea that all must have been a delusion. Maybe she dreamed what happened in the woods, and that vividly as she had dreamed it, there could be no real bond between them. Like maybe they aren't that close. I mean, she's really upset by how different he seems. Pearl doesn't seem to recognize her mother's feelings. Oh, I'm sorry, I read that completely wrong. She does respond to her mother's feelings. And of course, this is what children tend to do. They pick up on how their parents are feeling. She also kind of feels a little separated from the minister. And she says to Hester, "Mother, is that the same minister who kissed me by the brook?" And I'm thinking to myself, honey, you need to be quiet. Someone's going to hear you. And of course, that's what Hester says. Hold thy peace. We must not always talk in the marketplace of what happens to us in the forest. This is an understatement. And Pearl says, I could not be sure it was he, so strange he looked. Else I would have run to him and bid him kiss me now. Thank goodness she didn't do that. And that's literally what Hester says. What should he say, Pearl, save that it was no time to kiss, and that kisses are not to be given in the marketplace? Well for thee, foolish child, that thou didst not speak to him. No kidding. I mean, it's good for all of them that she didn't speak to him. Plus, kind of how mean, Remember in the forest, she didn't want him to kiss her, and now she does. Which, I mean, it's understandable, right? They want to be a family legitimately. That's the goal. But when you think about Pearl as a child, it's like from Dimmesdale's perspective, that would have really made him confused because he was hurt by the fact that she wouldn't let him kiss her in the forest. Another shade of the same sentiment in reference to Mr. Dimmesdale was expressed by a person whose eccentricities, which is actually considered insanity, as we would term it, led her to do what few of the townspeople would have ventured on, which is to start talking to Hester. So can we guess who this is? Who is going to start talking to Hester when nobody else in town ever does? Of course, it's Mistress Hibbins. That's who's going to talk to Hester. And she starts in with how she knows that they were in the forest and that, definitely that yonder man, is a sinner. She says here, but this minister, couldst thou surely tell whether he was the same man that encountered thee on the forest path? So she's talking about here the fact that Dimmesdale seems so different, as Hester is noticing. This obviously is shocking, I'm sure, to Hester. She's like, what do you mean? How do you know I saw him in the forest? And of course, she denies it. She says, Madam, I do not know of what you speak, because she knows that Mistress Hibbins is crazy. Yet strangely startled and awestricken, of course, I would be so uncomfortable. It is not for me to talk lightly of a learned and pious minister of the word like the Reverend Dimmesdale. So she completely distances herself from him and denies it, obviously. And Mistress Hibbins yells at her. And of course, people, I'm sure, can hear this. Fie, woman, fie. Dost thou not think I have been to the forest so many times and have yet no skill to judge who else has been there? Yea, though no leaf of the wild garlands which they wore while they danced be left in their hair, I know thee, Hester, for I behold the token. Like, I know you're a sinner because you have the scarlet letter. We may all see it in the sunshine, and it glows like a red flame in the dark. Thou wearest it openly, so there need be no question about it. But this minister, and then she wants to whisper in her ear, let me tell thee in thine ear, when the black man sees one of his own servants signed and sealed, so shy of owning to the bond as is the Reverend Mr. Dimmesdale, he hath a way of ordering matters so that the mark shall be disclosed. So she's saying that when someone doesn't openly acknowledge their sin, the devil will show it in the open daylight to the eyes of all the world. This is ominous. This is potentially foreshadowing. And then she laughs at her. So this is creepy, no question about it. And Pearl, she's, I'm sure, fascinated by this woman. What is it, good Mistress Hibbins? What is the mark that shall be disclosed? Hast thou seen it? No matter, darling, responded Mistress Hibbins, taking Pearl a profound reverence. Thou thyself would see it one time or another. They say, child, thou art the lineage of the Prince of Air. So they say that you are the child of the devil. This is a reference to the devil. Wilt thou ride with me some fine night to see thy father? She's like, will you come with me in the forest, she says to this little girl, and see your father, the devil? And then she laughs so shrilly that everybody can hear her, and they all think she's weird. Thank goodness, right? We don't want to give her too much credibility. By this time, the main prayer had been offered, and it's time for the sermon. So Hester takes up her position close beside the scaffold of the pillory, which is, I think, interesting. This is where she initially had to stand before the town and, acknowledge her sin. This is where she's standing now to listen to Dimmesdale give his sermon. And this whole next paragraph onto the next page is describing the way that Dimmesdale is speaking. And it doesn't really give us any content about what exactly he is saying, but it talks about how he speaks like music. He has a cadence that's sort of hypnotizing, mesmerizing. There's sort of a building, sort of crescendo, just like music, in the way that he is preaching. Now she caught the low undertones as if the wind, sinking down to repose itself, then ascended with it as it rose through progressive gradations of sweetness and power until its volume seemed to envelop her with an atmosphere of awe and solemn grandeur. This is the effect the way he speaks is affecting her. And yet, majestic as the voice sometimes became, there was forever in it an essential character of plaintiveness, a loud or low expression of anguish. So there's still within it all this beautiful way of speaking, and I'm sure he comes across as very holy and very much possessed by God's Spirit. There's this deep sadness in it still that, of course, Hester perceives. I mean, Hester knows how sad he is. I wonder, do other people perceive this, or is it just her? It seems as if he could almost be crying in pain sometimes. What was it? The complaint of a human heart, sorrow-laden, perchance guilty, of course, telling its secret, whether of guilt or sorrow, to the great heart of mankind, beseeching its sympathy or forgiveness at every moment, in each accent, and never in vain. It was this profound and continual undertone that gave the clergyman his most appropriate power. So we had this referenced before, where he is so human because he openly confesses, not his actual sin, but he does display to his congregation that he is flawed just through his penance and his illness and sometimes his sermons about the fact that he is not perfect in general. He says those things. It actually makes him a more powerful religious leader. During this time, Hester stood like a statue. She's just magnetically stuck in her place. She is completely, caught up in what he's saying. Little Pearl is not. So remember, she's quite often opposing every other sort of societal behavior. She's oblivious to what's going on. She had left her mother's side. She's playing on her own in the marketplace. She made the somber crowd cheerful by her erratic and glistening ray. So my guess is she's somewhat being distracting to the people who might be listening to the minister. Maybe they aren't all catching everything he says, quite possibly. So this whole section here talks about the way in which she's darting around. She even runs up to an Indian and smiles at him in the face. And, the Indian himself thinks that she's wilder than his own people, who have a lot more freedom just in their own society. Thence, with native audacity, but still with a reserve as characteristic, she flew into the midst of a group of mariners. So she runs into the middle of all those Spaniards who are the crew of the ship. The swarthy-cheeked wild men of the ocean, as the Indians were of the land, and they gazed wonderingly and admiringly at her, as if a flake of sea foam had taken the shape of the little maid. So again, another reference. She's like the ocean. She's like the sea birds. Now she's like the sea foam. One of these seafaring men, the shipmaster indeed, who had spoken to Hester earlier, was so smitten with Pearl's aspect that he attempted to lay hands upon her with purpose to snatch a kiss. Okay, so that's creepy. Finding it as impossible to touch her as to catch a hummingbird in the air, thank goodness, he took from his hat the gold chain that was twisted about it and threw it to Pearl. Pearl immediately puts it around her neck and waist with such happy skill that once seen, it became part of her, and it was difficult to imagine her without it. So she just takes whatever is given to her. And then the captain says, "Thy mother is yonder woman with the scarlet letter. Wilt thou carry her a message from me?" And Pearl says, "If I like the message, I will." "Tell her that I spake," that means I spoke again, "with the black-visaged, hump-shoulder doctor." So that would be Chillingworth. He talked to Chillingworth, and he engages to bring his friend, the gentleman she wots of, aboard with him. So let thy mother take no thought save for herself and thee. Okay, so this is Chillingworth again, managing logistics so he can carry out whatever plan he might have. We have a tremendous amount of rising tension, and this is certainly one of them. So what he's saying is that Chillingworth will bring Dimmesdale to the ship, and Hester only has to bring herself and Pearl. Mistress Hibbins, so this is funny too, will you tell this to thou witch baby? And Pearl says, "Mistress Hibbins says, my father is the Prince of Air. If thou callest me that ill name, I shall tell him of thee." So she's like, apparently, the devil is my father. And if you say that I'm a witch baby, I'm going to send the devil after you, is what she says. So this is just very much an example of like this. It's kind of like almost like magical realism a little bit, in the sense that you have like these powers that they really do believe are there. And so, there's this crossover between joking, saying, "Oh, you're a witch baby," and the fact that many, many people believe that there are witches, and that, the devil is among them and working on them, and that this is what Pearl represents. So there's just a lot of, it just, again, shows us how focused the Puritans were on witches, which makes sense given that the Salem witch trials would occur soon after this time. So she zigzags through the marketplace, and she goes to Hester, and as a good girl, she does literally tell her mother, what the man said. With her mind harassed by terrible perplexity in which the shipmaster's intelligence involved her, she was so subjected to another trial. There were so many people present from the country around who had often heard of the Scarlet Letter. So what's happening here is Hester hears this news. Of course, it upsets her. It says that her spirit almost sank when she heard this, because she's like, oh my gosh, we're going to get trapped by Chillingworth. That's what she's thinking. And at the same time that she's going through just this internal, angst and worry about what's going to happen to them, everybody is staring at her. So the people who are in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, they don't stare at her like that anymore. They're used to her. But because this is a big election day, people have come from all around. And so I just want to remind you, like, the Massachusetts Bay Colony is what Boston is today. It also includes Salem, which was like 20 miles away. So it was a pretty broad area. And there were some people who did not live right in the heart of that, what is now Boston, but, lived in other areas. And so they don't come in to the center of town very often, but they're all here for this particular day. And they have heard of Hester Prynne, and now they can see her, and they just can't stop staring at her. They're like, oh, there's the woman. So kind of describes all the different people who keep looking at her scarlet letter, which makes her feel even more vulnerable, because what if they perceive that something's going on between her and Dimmesdale? At the final hour, when she was so soon to fling aside the burning letter, it had strangely become the center of more remark and excitement, and was thus made to sear her breast more painfully than at any time since the first day she put it on. So this is ominous. It's like, her sin is burning into her because everybody is staring at her. It's also just ironic. She's finally going to be free of all of this judgment. And on this particular day, the judgment is so much more extreme. So while Hester stands in this magic circle, no one will get near her, but they are staring at her, where the cunning cruelty of her sentence seemed to have fixed her forever. The admirable preacher was looking down from the sacred pulpit upon an audience whose very inmost spirits had yielded to his control. Everybody is obviously very pulled and focused on him as well. The sainted minister in the church, the woman of the scarlet letter in the marketplace, these are the big attractions for the day. What imagination would have irreverent enough to surmise that the same scorching stigma was on them both? And this is where we are left hanging, heading into the 23rd chapter.